this system delivering on the expectations for record keeping, okay? So why do people buy EDRMS projects in the first place? Well, it's typically for these 4 reasons. Number 1 is to increase the compliance. Number 2 is to decrease the legal risk, either of getting hit with sanctions or fines, or reducing the costs and complexity of a defense when you do find yourself in that situation. EDRMS definitely helps a lot with document retrieval in a number of ways and reduces the storage costs. So that's the big picture of where we're coming from. Why do we get EDRMS? So we're focused today on how do we prove compliance. So I've been doing this for 20+ years, and I've asked people, how do you know if your system is compliant or not? And this is what I hear. I hear, well, people are using it. Well, yeah, that's wonderful, but it doesn't mean it's compliant. Number 2 is, well, we're getting X documents per day stored in it, so that means it's being used, so that means it's successful, right? Yes, it does, but it doesn't mean that we're meeting compliance goals. This is a common one. We have it installed, and it's up and running, so we did it. No, you didn't do it. You just got it running. And users are actually classifying documents against the retention schedule, which is outstanding. However, once again, that does not prove that we are meeting our compliance obligations. This is my favorite one by far. I hear this a lot. You know, the CEO is walking down the hall, runs into the project manager and said, "How's the project going?" "It's going great." And they tend to fold their arms and big smile. But what does great really mean? So today we're going to try to quantify that. So an EDRMS at its fundamental core is very simple. We divide the company into business activities. We assign a retention to each of those activities, and then incoming documents are classified against those activities, thus bearing the retention rule of that activity. Really simple at its core. Very complicated as a technology. So this is how we're going to quantify compliance today. 3 things. Number 1, how many records do we have? You can't claim compliance if you don't know that, because, you know, if you had 10 records, that's one thing, but if you have 1 million, most people don't even know how many records they have. So the first step is, how many do we have? Number 2, of the records that we know we have, are we managing them as a record? Just because they're there doesn't mean we're managing them as a record. And managing them as a record means that we are that we're making them immutable, that we are classifying against the retention schedule, and we're putting necessary metadata on them. So there's a difference between a record and a record that's being managed. To be compliant, we have to be managing it as a record, okay? And number 3 is, are they classified correctly against the retention schedule? Because if not, they'll be deleted too early or too late, not in accordance with the retention schedule, therefore we're not compliant. So this is a way to look at it from the bottom to the top. At the bottom, we have to know, what records do we have? How many per day? Number 2 is, those that we have, of all the records that we now know we have, what percentage of them do we actually have under records management control? If you have 10 million documents on file shares and you know you're doing nothing with them, and you have 10 million on your EDRMS, then that's 50%. You're halfway there, right? You're only applying managed records control to half of them. The third one is the critical one. The third one is, of the ones that we do have under management control, are we destroying them in accordance with the retention schedule? So in order to be compliant, we have to have level 1, followed by level 2, followed by level 3. We cannot have the level 3, measure 3, without 2 and 1. So these are the 3, in the previous slide, sorry for backing up, these are the English language concepts, 3 of them. What do we have? How many? Which of them do we have under control? And are we destroying them properly? This is the technical measures, okay? The first one is the qualification rate. These are the technical terms that we use to describe it. The first one is, of all the documents we have, what percentage of them constitute records that we should have under control? And we tend to break that down into two streams, email and documents. We'll get to that later. The second measure is the declaration rate, which is an expression of those that we now know we should have under records control, what percentage of them do we have under control? And the third and final one, the big important one, is the classification accuracy rate, which is of those that we do have under management control, what percentage of those are being classified correctly. Not classified yes or no, but classified correctly, okay? So we're going to take this diagram, and you have to realize that you have to hit level 3 in order to be compliant. You're only in compliance as long as you're destroying records in accordance with the retention schedule. That's called disposition, and you've got to get there, okay? So we're going to impose on this pyramid now the 3 technical phrases. So level 1 is qualification rate. Level 2 is the declaration rate. The third one is the classification accuracy rate. So we're going to deal with them one at a time, and then we're done. Here's the first one, the qualification rate. How? We're going to break it into documents and emails. So ask yourself this, how many emails do you get per day on average? Okay? Let's go with 100, let's say. Most of the times I get an answer of either 50, usually north of the Canadian border, or south of the border, I usually get 100. Doesn't matter what it is. But for every 100 emails you get, what percentage do you believe meet the definition of a business record? So anything related to the business is really a valid candidate as a record. We should be treating it as a record. So the way I like to say it is, all email that's related to the conduct of your business, with the exception of logistical and transitory, are records. So what is your percentage? Well, the typical that we run into is 5%. How do you measure that? Well, here's how we do. We'll ask a group of users to take 100 emails. We give them an instruction. We say, write on a piece of paper which ones are a record and which ones are not. And write it in black if they're doing it on paper. And we give them no instructions. When they say, well, how do I know? We say, no instruction, just do it. And we give them no more than 5 seconds per document, per email. And that's a hilarious thing to do. What you end up with is a bunch of people in the room who made swift decisions, because we're trying to simulate real life. We don't want them to stop and think too much. So that tells you what they think, what percentage they think are records. Then we take those same emails and we give them to a records professional who can tell us the actuals, right? So, and they'll take all the time in the world that they need to come up with the real one. So now we know the real number, which is the actual that the records manager determined, and we also know the black number, the one that the users put in, that is not likely to be the actual, right? We're not here today to deal with how to solve that gap. There will be a gap. So for today, we're going to go with 5%, and we're going to further assume that everyone gets 100 emails per user per day, okay? Now that's not get, that's send and receive, in and out, inbound and outbound. Secondly, how many documents do users create? Well, that's really difficult to find out, but if they create them, then we can safely assume they're going to be business records. Very safe assumption. What about the ones they download, copy, receive via email? Well, that's trickier still, but if any document in our possession is used in the conduct of our business, we can safely assume it's a business record. Again, I'm not paying much attention to redundant, outdated, or transient. So we're going to go with 1 document per user per day as a very certain, very conservative measure here. So How do we measure that, though? Well, we use two ways, two techniques. One is we look at the file shares, take away 40%, divide the number of files that were stored there over a year, divide that by 225 working days a year, and the number of users. That gives you a rough ballpark. And we also use surveys. Doesn't matter how you come up with a number, but for today only, we're going to go with a very conservative number of 1. So for today, we're going to say that there are 5 emails a day that are qualified as a record per user. I further assume that 1 document per day per user will be a record. So that gives us a total of 6, so that's our magic number. So we now know that on level 1, we expect 6 records per day per user. And that's an extremely reliable number. Okay, it's always going to be generally higher than that. So this is our first measure, which is it's aspirational in that we don't measure its progress. We just need to know what it is. You can re-sample it, re-measure that from time to time. I would recommend maybe checking annually to see if that number has changed much. But it's a measure. So in the gauge here, our first gauge of the day, our magic number is 6. So we can now evaluate how are we doing against that 6. Are we getting 5 per person a day? Are we getting 10 per person a day? So when it comes to the email, we expect 5. When it comes to documents, we expect 1. So if we have 1,000 users, we expect 5,000 emails per day, and 1,000 documents per day. So I like to separate the two measures. You don't have to, but I really do like to separate them. Why? Because the technology path for each is hugely, hugely different. And you can be successful or failure at either one of those two paths independently of the other. Plus, you might be able to diagnose and troubleshoot problems independently of the other. Now, the second measure is our declaration rate. And Natalie, I just noticed you've got a few people in a waiting room there. So the second measure is a declaration rate, which is how many of the records that we should be managing as records are we managing as records. In some EDRMS systems, that will translate to, of all the millions of records outside our system, how many came into the system. So this is which ones are under records control, okay? So it's expressed as a percentage of target. So we know that if we have 1,000 users, and let's stick with that example for today, 1,000 users. If we have 1,000 users and we expect 6,000 records per day under control, that's our goal. Our target is 100%. That's 5 emails and 1 document. And we, in any reasonable project, we can't expect to get there instantly, but we can at least track our project towards it, okay? Very, very important. So how do we measure that? Insanely simple. You walk up to your EDRMS system and you ask it, how many records did we get in today? Not rocket science. It's a simple query that sounds like this. Give me a list of all documents where record equals yes and date equals today. And every single EDRMS system on earth will allow you to do that simple query. You could get sophisticated. You could use modern reporting tools, and you can have it produce a report every single day automatically and even show you trend lines as well. Now, again, I like to separate email from documents. Why? Again, because the technology paths are different, and emails are so important, roughly 5 times more important. I think most people would agree that in this day and age, emails are our documents. They are our records. Some people, almost everything they do is in email, very little in documents. Anyway, so in order to separate them out, you do a query that sounds like this. Record equals yes, and date equals today, and format equals .msg. Now that's a crude way to do it. Different brands of different EDRMS software have different methods, but they all will allow you to tell what's a message from a non-message. You can always do that. So if we did a measurement here, a report, and we said, okay, we expected 4 per user, 5 per user per day. If we look at this example here on the bottom, I'll just turn on my laser pointer here. There we go. So if in this example on the screen, if we were expecting 5 per user per day, but we received 4, then that's an 80% declaration rate for email, okay? Because we're measuring email separately than documents. Here, it's the same measure, but it's for the documents. So if we were expecting, in this case, a fictional example of 10, and we received 9, then that's a 90% declaration rate. Okay, so in our hypothetical example, we're using 1,000 users and 6 records per person per day. So our target is 6,000. If we hit the target of 6,000, that's 100% achievement in declaration rate. If we hit 5,000, then that's a 50% achievement on that measure. Okay, and again, it's unrealistic to expect perfection in day 1. It takes time, so you can at least trend, look at the trend over time and see how you're doing there. You're making progress. So that's the first 2 out of 3, and that was pretty quick. And it should be pretty quick because they're pretty simple. Now we're getting into the good stuff, which is the classification accuracy rate. That's the 3rd measure, and that's at the top of the pyramid. This is the one that will determine if your project is a success or failure. And I really, truly mean that. Okay? Okay, and I just want to remind you, if you have a question, just put it in the chat box. I will check the chat box every now and then, okay? Okay, so the CAR, the classification accuracy rate. Why is this so dangerous? It's because if you fail to hit it, then what it really is telling you is that you cannot do disposition. If you cannot do a disposition, then what value does the project have? The sole value of the project is to be compliant with the retention schedule. What does that mean? That means that we're deleting documents or preserving them, saving them, in accordance with that retention schedule. And if you cannot do disposition, then the whole thing has been pointless. Everything we do in an EDRMS project builds up to that. So the classification accuracy rate tells us, can we do that disposition or not? Is it safe to do it? If it's not, and we can't do it, then we have a dead project on our hands, a complete waste of money, time, and effort, okay? So the goal here is to figure out what is an acceptable level. So let's look at the components of this. Okay, so first of all, let's dig into what classification really means. So on the right, we have a retention schedule. The blue buckets contain records, and each blue bucket has a retention rule assigned to it, okay? On the left, we have our incoming records, okay, from the users, 6,000 per day. So the idea is that somehow these documents on the left have to end up in the appropriate buckets on the right. If they don't, then they get the wrong retention rule assigned to them. So this verb, this act, is called classification. So we need it to happen successfully one way or the other 6,000 times a day. Right? So think about that for a minute. This act of classification has to happen 6,000 times a day, whether it's by automation or by human hands. It doesn't matter how, but it has to happen one way or the other. So in this example right here, you'll notice there's a document, Doc2, about a safety policy, and that's got to end up in the safety bucket with retention rule 1. A budget document has to end up in the budget's place with retention rule 5, one way or the other. And every brand, shape, and size of EDRMS is different. This is just generalizing the story. Now, this is where we get into the real nuts and bolts of it. This is where things start to look a little different than you might think. When I ask an EDRMS owner, how many categories do you have in your retention schedule? Some say, oh, we use the big bucket theory. We only have 25 buckets, right? And others groan and they say, oh, mine, ours is 20 years old, it's grown to 400 or 500 categories. A category is a blue bucket. It's a bucket. It's a choice, right? So think of it like this. There are two species of categories. Admin categories, administration categories, shown here in blue, and case categories shown in green. What's the difference? Administration categories are a bucket that acts as a conveyor belt. Every document goes in there, ends up on a conveyor belt for a certain period of time and drops off the end. We call that administrative or time-based retention. Very simple. The green activities, the case categories or activities in the retention schedule, are event-based. What does that mean? That means that all the records against that activity, such as contracts, the records have to be grouped according to specific contracts. So every time you put a document in the system about a contract, it has to be assigned to one of those contracts. Similarly with employees, those are case records. So any document or record about an employee has to be assigned to an employee. So the system has to force the user to say which employee, which contract, or which project, okay? So here in this fictional example, we have 250 different administrative categories or conveyor belts. We have 3 case categories. We have contracts, employees, and projects. So the total admin categories is 250. Total case categories is 3 for a total number of blue buckets of 253. So you would think that when someone goes to put a document in this system as a record, that they would have 253 choices. Well, no, they don't. This is the reality over here. Let's pretend we have 1,000 contracts, 1,000 employees, and 1,000 projects. What that means is that for a contract, the user has to select from one of 1,000 contracts. If the record is about an employee, they have to select from one of 1,000 employees and so on. So that means that if I have an email, for example, and I want to put it in the system as a record, 253 possible places to put it. I have 3,250 possible places to put it. So I call those choices or selections. So what this means is that 6,000 times a day, people have to put in a document and make the choice against 3,250 possible target destinations or choices. So classification occurs 6,000 times, but there's 3,250 possibilities in any one classification, because that email could be about a project 7. It could be about employee Barney Rubble. It could be about contract ABC landscaping. So remember that it's not just a choice of 253, it's a choice of 3,250. So what does that do? That means that the odds of making a mistake go up because the choices are higher. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to establish a baseline of constants. These are constants that will not change for the rest of this session, okay? 1,000 users, 6 records per user per day. Okay, 5 emails and 1 document. Now, ask yourself this. Let's suppose somebody put a document in, and the records manager wanted to take a look at that document and say, was this one right or was it wrong? So, how long will that take? Think about it. You have to look at this document, figure out what it's about, and then look at the retention schedule and see if they line up correctly. And if it's a case, you have one further step. You have to say, oh, this is about contract 707. Uh-oh, it was accidentally put in with contract 606 or 708. It's in the wrong place, right? It's misclassified. So we're going to assume for today that the amount of time that it takes a records professional to correct a mistake or even to evaluate one is 1 minute. 1 minute per document, okay? And remember, there are 6,000 coming down the pipe every working day. Speaking of working days, we'll assume 21 working days per month, okay? So now, let's see how this plays out. So we're only going to look at Monday. Try to resist looking through the rest of this diagram. Look at Monday, okay? Here's what happened on Monday. We got 6,000 documents in. Fantastic. That is a 100% declaration day. Beautiful day. Now, how many of those 6,000 were correctly classified? Well, let's pretend for a moment that you took a look and you concluded that 50% of them were right and 50% of them were wrong. How did you do that? We'll look at that later, but maybe you just looked at a bunch of them and sampled them. There's a bunch of ways to do it. But either way, we believe that 50% of them are right and 50% of them are wrong. So that means that our classification error rate, the CAR, is believed to be 50%. So what does that mean? Well, that means that of the 6,000 records that we got, 3,000 of them are misclassified. That's 3,000 errors, 3,000 mistakes on a Monday, okay? So let's go fix them. That's what we're paid to do as records people. No problem. It is 4 o'clock in the afternoon or so. I got an hour. Let's go fix these things. Okay. Rub our hands together. Let's get going. Okay. There's 3,000 of them. It takes us 1 minute per document. Well, that's 3,000 minutes, which translates to 50 hours. In case anybody has a calculator handy, that's 50 hours. It's 4 in the afternoon. I'm leaving at 5, and I have 50 hours of work ahead of me, okay? 50. That works out to 6 days. It would take me 6 days to finish that. So let's go to Tuesday. That wasn't a good day, so let's go to Tuesday. And we get a repeat. We get 6,000 records again on Tuesday. Excellent day, 100% declaration rate. Beautiful day. And now we have 12,000 records in our possession under management control. They're all classified. But again, we have a 50% classification error rate. So that means that we now have 3,000 more mistakes, 3,000 from Tuesday. So the total number of mistakes is 6,000 now. So I still need another 50 hours today to fix those. But if I didn't fix them yesterday, I now have a buildup of 100 hours I need to do to fix these 3,000 mistakes. So that's 13 days of work I've built up now because I didn't get any fixed yesterday. I never had time. So I've got 13 days of work built up. Welcome to day 2 of your beautiful new EDRMS system. From one measure, it's perfect. The declaration is perfect, 100%. But our classification accuracy rate, we don't know. We think it's 50% right, 50% wrong. What's the point of this slide? Well, let's do a little more math first. If we project out on a yearly basis, if I were to not do any of this during the day, because, I mean, I'm a records manager, and I have 6 or 7 hours worth of things to do every day that are not babysitting this EDRMS. So I end up with 12,600 hours of necessary work to fix this mess, to clean it up and make sure they're accurate. And the total number of days required is 1,575. That would take a full-time team of 6 employees to fix. 6. Full-time, all day, every day, to fix this mistake. So, under the assumption that nobody on this call has a spare 6 employees in their back pocket, then guess what? This problem cannot be fixed. If you reach this point, you need to know this. You cannot fix it. Nobody can fix it. It is broken. It is permanently broken, and the project has failed. I can tell you from personal experience that a shockingly high percentage of all EDRMS projects on our planet today are in this hurt locker, okay? I know of many, many EDRMS projects that have been going on for years, and they will never be able to do a disposition, ever. It is a complete failure. We need to avoid that, okay? So that's what this presentation today is all about, which is how do we avoid that from ever happening? Because a single day of a high error rate is unacceptable, okay? Now, if anyone on the call is really into math, I am, I love math, then you'll know that this is wrong. What is wrong with this? There's one subtle little mistake in this diagram, this table, that few people catch. How did you know that if you know that 50% of them are correct, then you don't know which are the 3,000 correct ones versus the 3,000 incorrect ones. What does that mean? That means that you had to check all 6,000. This table has a false assumption that I only need to fix 3,000. Well, that's true, but I don't know which 3,000. So the only way to do that is to check all 6,000. So this is what it's really like. Now we're in twice the hurt locker. So the time to fix it just doubled. So we went from needing 6 employees to 13, okay? So it's actually worse than it looks, much worse than it looks, okay? And I can name, I would never do it, but I have had personal experience with three full-time professional, highly trained, highly educated records professionals who have exited their jobs and their careers when they found themselves in this situation. Because here's what happens. You're 2 years in. You've spent so much time and energy building this project, and someone says, well, it's time to do a disposition and prove that this thing works. I can't. Why not? Well, because the error rate is too high. So you don't want to make that many mistakes, right? So, well, go fix it. I can't. Why not? Because it's impossible. The numbers are too high. So what do records people do? They walk away and exit at least the job, if not the career. Because whose fault is it if you let this occur? It might not be your fault that the problem happened, but it is your fault that you weren't watching this, monitoring it, and preventing it. In other words, on Monday, the first day, you need to wave a flag and say, shut this project down. It's not working. We're doing something wrong. We need to fix it, okay? Because you can't let this accumulate. So this is just showing the projection over time of one single week. One single week for 1,000 users. In my personal experience, 6 records per day is very low. This gets much worse. So this slide here shows the effort level in person days of work necessary to solve this after just one single week. There's just no way. There's absolutely no way that anybody could ever correct this. So now, here's a question I'd like you to think about. We all can agree that nobody in their right mind, especially a trained records professional, would ever proceed with a disposition at a 50% error rate. That's just too crazy to even contemplate. But hidden behind that no answer, that no, is this, which is, well, if you won't act and do a disposition at 50% accuracy, what percentage of accuracy would you proceed? That's the question. And that is the number we need now. So what is that number? 85%. Where does that number come from? Well, it's not a perfect number, but it's a good enough number. That number comes from my experience with records professionals over the last couple of decades. I get their opinions. That includes many lawyers and a few judges. A 15% error rate, generally speaking, in most industries is considered acceptable. So I think you'll be legally defensible if you are in 15% error range. Now, if you were in the surgical business or nuclear industry, forget it. You're going to need a 95%, maybe even higher. But along with that higher expectation comes a higher diligence level and a higher technology spend, right? And spend on resources as well. Maybe you will hire 6 people to get it right, but not today. So we're going to go from this point forward with an 85% classification accuracy rate, which I personally believe is acceptable for most industries, okay? So let's just run with that for now. You can set your own number, but you have to find that number. And when you're constructing, designing, planning, and deploying your EDRMS, every single decision you make about spending money, configuring the software, training a person, every decision you make that influences that project moves one of these 3 needles. It moves either the qualification rate, the declaration rate, or the classification accuracy rate. But I assure you that everything you do inside that project will move one of those 3 needles. And the third measure, CAR, has to be above 85% on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, and every day of the week, every week of the year. You cannot afford for that needle to drop below 85% for even one single day, because you'll lose your project that day, okay? You can't come up with enough time to fix mistakes. There's no way you can accumulate that many mistakes, okay? So we have to get there. And the good news is there's lots of ways to get there. Okay, now, so if we agree on 85%, then how the heck are we ever going to measure it? Because to measure it, you've got to read 6,000 documents, which takes 6,000 minutes, which is 5 days of work. Can't be done. Impossible. So the only way to do it is with modern statistical methods, which is what we're going to do now. So this is very close. The science behind this is the same as polls, which is, you know, you survey voters, and you find out and predict what they're likely to, how likely they are to vote for someone. And I know this is a terrible time to be talking about voting poll accuracy. Couldn't be worse, actually. But polls aside, the science is sound. The science is sound. The idea is that if you do a sample, you can predict with a high degree of accuracy what the actual classification accuracy rate is. So we're going to use the same science to do that. The science is buried inside these online calculators called sample size calculators. So I brought one up for you here. They're all over the internet. There's hundreds of them there. So what you do is it has 3 elements to it. One is a confidence level, and pick 95%. So we want to be accurate within 95% range. The confidence interval is the deviation from the norm. Think of it as a bandwidth. The wider the confidence level, the more the actual answer can vary from what the actual is, right? The predicted rate will vary. So the smaller the confidence interval, the narrower it is, the smaller a band of uncertainty. And okay. The population is 6,000. That's the number of documents we have in the system. So if you type in the confidence level of 95, and you should, leave that alone because that's an industry norm statistical value. Confidence interval, we can play with that, but I'm going to go with 5 for now. And a population of 6,000, then the sample size needed is 361. Okay? What that means is that 361 measurements or tests out of the 6,000 tell us that we're 95% confident that the real number is plus or minus 5 away from that number. So the 95% means 19 times out of 20, that the measured accuracy rate, let's say we measured it and we came up with 85, okay? Just as a pretend number. We did 361 samples and we came up with 85% accuracy rate. Then that means that it varies between 80% and 90%. That's the variation around the 85%, okay? And that's what the confidence interval tells us. That's what the 5 is doing. It means plus or minus 5. So what this shows is how do we deal with that? Because in our example, 361 minutes is still too much for me to do in a typical day. That's 361 minutes. So what we typically do here is we divide that up among the 1,000 users. So typically, if we have 1,000 users and we're divided into 10 departments, and I've listed 10 fictional departments here, then you would have each department do a sample for that department only. And that's a good idea because they're used to their department and the nature of the work that goes on there. Not you, they are. So this table shows that if we stuck with our plus or minus 5, which is my personal recommendation, then that means that we know that the number that came in is between 90% accurate in what I call the safe zone. So it's between 90 and 95% accuracy, and that's plenty good enough for us, for statistically. So what this shows is that if we take the 361 minutes necessary, that turns out to be about half an hour. If you look on the right here, roughly 0.6 hours, roughly half an hour for each of those departments to measure that. Doesn't take too long. And 361 is quite a high sample size. I could even, you could even go with fewer than that. This table shows that if you wanted to narrow the confidence interval, the sample size goes up quite a bit and your effort level goes up. I would have trouble justifying these two. I like the 5, which means that at a 90%, at a confidence interval of plus or minus 5, if we can have a 90%, which means that if we measure 90%, if it comes back as a 90% accurate, that means that the number could be as low as 85 or as high as 95. If we measure it and it comes back with 95%, it could be as low as 90 and as high as 100, okay? But it averages 95. That's the median. That's the median predicted accuracy rate is 95, okay? So why do I like the 90? Because it's a little bit of wiggle room from the 85. I want to stay above that 85, not at it. I want to be well above it. So to be above it, you want to be measuring, you want to be reading 90% or so. Okay? So the idea here is get a reasonable sample size, distribute the sample so that the work is distributed, and you should have a very highly accurate number. You can play with the sample size indicator all you wish, okay? So what does this look like on a gauge? Well, this is our gauge right here, the classification accuracy rate. We know we got to hit above 85. So you notice that this yellow band is really tiny. You're either alive or dead. You either hit it or you don't. There's no real wiggle room, okay? You have to stay above it. So this measures of all the records that are under our management control, proper records management control, what percentage of them do we know are correctly classified? So in this sample down below, we saw that there are 7 right and 3 wrong out of 10. That's a 70% accuracy rate, which would mean 300 mistakes out of 1,000 documents, right? In our case, with 6,000, we have to be well above 85. So what does your dashboard look like? Any modern EDRMS can do this. It's done with modern reporting tools and databases. So at the heart of every EDRMS is a database. We can do these numbers. They're not hard to do. So this shows 3 measures. The first one is the qualification rate, up and down here. I just split it into email and direct, or what I call documents. So in the email, it's around 5% is the target. With the documents, we believe most of them are records, so it's way up there, above 90%, somewhere around 95. Now the second measure is here, again split into 2 streams, email and documents. So the declaration rate, the target, is the same in both cases. It's 100%. So it's just a measurement over time. How close are we tracking against that number? And then there's this one. This one's not split into streams because this only cares about the total of all our emails and our documents. So it's everything we have under records control. How close are we to our 85%, right? So that's vitally important. We've got to be above 85%. So that's the third and final measure. So what we didn't talk about, because there's not enough time today, is how do we get there? Well, that's another seminar coming up, another webinar. How do we get there? But the answer, in short, is automation. We cannot count on users to do this manually. Can't. So we're going to use automation to ensure that we hit that number. And there's definitely lots and lots to do about that. My personal belief is that any well-designed, properly deployed EDRMS will have no difficulty at all staying well above 85%. Okay, so what does this mean for the records professional who has a responsibility for an EDRMS? Well, number one is this: rules-based record keeping, automation. You have to use automation to make this happen. It will not happen with if you have users doing this manually. So you have to know the automation, understand your products, and put them to work properly. Number 2 is you have to manage your 3 numbers. Literally, you can look at that 85% and say, and turn around backwards and look at your whole project and say, what do I need to do to reach and preserve that number? Okay, so you have to constantly monitor those numbers very, very carefully. And you have to report on them. And only if you reach those numbers do you stand a chance of ever conducting a disposition. So if your minimum threshold is 85%, and you then a year out, you can look back and say, my goodness, I've accumulated 15 million records here. Well done. Can I dispose of them? If it's above 85% and you can prove it, then you can proceed. Now you've got a successful project. This is the kind of a chart that you should be seeing on your wall. Maybe not every day, but certainly once a week, which is how are you tracking against the numbers? This is an example from Texas, but you can notice that the qualification rate is different by department. The legal department, half of their emails are records, whereas in finance, only 5% are that valuable. So that's no surprise there, right? Numbers can shift across departments. So I'm going to end it in a moment with a little movie here. I don't even know if you can see this movie. I've never tried it over Zoom before, so this is a bit of an experiment, but it's only about 45 seconds, and then I'll stop for questions, okay?
Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. And since we've no place to go, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. Man, it doesn't show signs of stopping, and I've got the lights are turned way down low. Let it snow, let it snow.
So anybody old enough like me will remember that that ad was put out by Heineken during the height of the U.S. I think it was not Enron. It was a trading company that was doing some pretty nasty stuff with electrical and energy trading. I forget the name of the company, but they were spoofing the fact that the company, when it got in trouble with the regulators, was destroying documents. So I don't want to see that happen with anybody on this call, for sure. So I'm going to leave it wide open for questions. I'll just monitor the chat box. And if there are no questions, then we can terminate a little early, but I'll just hang on another minute here or so. Natalie, are you getting questions that I'm not, perhaps?
Nope, I'm not
good.
getting
Okay.
anything either, no.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Outstanding. Okay.
Just a lot of happy people, it seems.
Okay, well that's wonderful. So I would like to remind everyone that we're going to be putting out a webinar every month. The webinars are meant to be very, very hard-hitting and very state-of-the-art. So keep watching those webinars. Thank you very much, everyone.